In the previous section, you've learned how to use Mintel to take a demographic deep dive into your sports fan, as well as locate other consumer market research reports. While the Mintel reports are excellent in many ways and are quite amazing, there are some limitations in how you can use them. For example, the sample size for each report in Mintel is typically around 2,000 people, and typically those 2,000 people are only asked questions that pertain to a specific report's topic. In the case of the sports reports, consumers only answer questions about sports. For the restaurant reports, for example, consumers would answer questions only about restaurants. This means that while we may know detailed and critical information about NBA fans, for example, and we may know really useful information about the full-service restaurant consumer, we aren't able to use and combine the two reports to understand how many NBA fans eat at Applebee's. That's just one example of how you can't really combine the two reports into something more meaningful. They're still really useful, that's just a limitation of the reports. That's where Simmons is especially useful. The Simmons survey typically consists of over 25,000 adults in the US, as opposed to 2,000 per report in Mintel. Simmons surveys those 25,000 people about everything, from what sports they watch, what kinds of beer they drink, what cereal they eat, how often they exercise, and tons of other consumer, demographic, psychographic, and lifestyle information. In this section, you'll learn how to use Simmons to create custom crosstab reports. These tables allow you to compare and analyze information across different consumer data variables. When you first log into Simmons, you arrive at the crosstab screen. We will use the tools on this screen to add data variables to both columns and rows. Adding them to columns and rows will allow us to build a table to compare the variables. The default way of searching in Simmons is to use this Smart Search at the top of the page. If you know what you are looking for, the Smart Search works reasonably well. For example, if we search for NASCAR, we can see all of the variables that mention NASCAR. We can narrow the categories using the limiters on the left side. You can select a variable, then add it to a column or row. For my example, let's look at entertainment and leisure. And let's look at people who are very interested in any NASCAR. And then we'll click on the column to add it to our columns. Now, while this works reasonably well, I personally don't find it very efficient. My preference, and I think it's more powerful and more efficient, is to use the dictionary search in the top right of the menu. Here in the dictionary search, we can search for our variable again. Let's search for NASCAR again and see what we get. We can look at the categories of the variables retrieved. I'm interested in people who are very interested or show some interest in NASCAR. If we look under entertainment and leisure, we see that Simmons is currently only pulling results for theme parks, not those interested in NASCAR. I want to look around a little bit and see that the search is currently searching just for answers only. So what I'm going to do is change this to all and see if that changes our search a bit. We now see that sports interest is now visible. Let's look at sports interest in the last 12 months, and here we see various types of NASCAR. So let's look at any NASCAR. And I'm interested in people who are very interested in NASCAR, so I can click and drag that down to our columns. Now let's compare the variable in our column by selecting some additional variables for our rows. We want to populate the rows down here. Let's use the X first to clear our search. This time, instead of searching, I'm going to browse the category headings on the left. This allows us to see all of the different categories that Simmons covers. In the example I showed at the beginning of the video, I compared sports fans to types of vehicles purchased. So let's try to find the automobile section in the list of categories on the left. As we do so, we can see all the different kinds of things that Simmons covers by consumer product category, as well as other lifestyle statements and demographics and other kinds of information. At the very bottom, we find the automotive section. You kind of have to hunt around inside of Simmons and browse the categories to find what you're looking for. But to be honest with you, that's a little bit part of the fun, and also it actually helps you find relevant information that you may not have found simply by searching. So for my example, I want to compare NASCAR fans and by type of vehicle that they may have purchased. So let's compare NASCAR fans who bought Ford vehicles as their last purchase or who bought Toyota vehicles as their last purchase. So let's go under Make a Vehicle. And here we see a category for domestic most recently acquired. And we see there's a Ford here, and we will drag the Ford down to our rows. Following the same pattern there, let's scroll down. There is a foreign category for most recently acquired. And if we scroll down here, we see Toyota, and we'll likewise drag that down to our rows. Once we have our rows and columns established, we've got something to compare. So now we can actually go back to the top right-hand corner of the page and click on the arrow icon to run the analysis. This crosstab screen can be a bit weird and confusing to look at, but I'll explain everything as we go. In the first box, we have the variables that we search for in our rows. The next box gives us the numbers of the variable of the total population. Here we see the total sample size of the entire survey, the total number of the sample size that bought a Ford, and the total number of the sample size that bought a Toyota. These are so close, it's really interesting to compare. Now let's take a look at the vertical column underneath the total heading. The way you would read this is as follows. So here we'd say of the total population, following the vertical column down, 12.3% of them bought a Ford as their most recent vehicle purchased. Likewise, to repeat, of the total population, 10.7% of them bought a Toyota as their most recent vehicle purchase. Notice that these percentages are based on the weighted number, not the actual sample size. The numbers are very different when we compare those car purchases with NASCAR fans. So the way we'd read this, starting at the top, is of those people who were very interested in NASCAR, 15.3% of them bought a Ford as their last vehicle, while 6.9% of them bought a Toyota as their last vehicle purchase. Now let's look at the index, which is a way of comparing across the entire survey population. With an index of 124, those very interested in NASCAR were 24% more likely to have bought a Ford as their last vehicle purchase than the average adult consumer across the survey. By the same token, with an index of 64, NASCAR fans are 36% less likely than the average consumer to have purchased a Toyota as their last vehicle. Let's add some more variables to compare. We can do that by clicking on the dictionary button to return to the search screen. If we want to compare NASCAR fans to hardcore NBA and NFL fans, we can add those variables as well. Let's once again browse to the entertainment and leisure category, then to sports interests, then to sports interests last 12 months, and here we see the full range of sports covered in Simmons. Let's select NFL and add very interested to our column. Likewise, let's add National Basketball Association for NBA and add very interested to that column. Once we have our rows and columns set, we can again click on the arrow button to run our analysis and go back to our crosstab. Because we've added to the crosstab, we're going to have to scroll to the right to see everything, which can be a little bit cumbersome, but you'll get it all on the same page. Looking at the indexes in the NFL fans column, we see that the NFL fans are generally similar with the purchasing preferences of the rest of the population, because the index is so close to 100. If we go further to the right and look at NBA fans, here we see that the NBA fans seem to be the most likely to buy a Toyota. Once again, we can read this column from the top. Of those people who took the survey who said they were very interested in NBA basketball, 13.2% of them purchased a Toyota as their last vehicle. If we look at the index there, we see that because of the index is 123, which is 23 points above 100, that means NBA fans, or very interested NBA fans for that matter, are 23% more likely than the rest of the average population to have purchased a Toyota in their last vehicle purchase. Let's try one more example. Let's assume I want to dig a bit deeper into these NFL fans. Perhaps there's a segment of the NFL fan population that is not so average. As an example, maybe we want to know if NFL fans with at least a college degree have different purchasing behaviors than the average NFL fan. We can build a custom variable in Simmons to try to look at this more closely. Back on our dictionary search page, we can once again look for our NFL fans. Instead of moving the very interested to our column, let's drag this down to this bottom box. Now, let's go find information in our search tree here for educational attainment. This is under the Lifestyle Demographics category and further nested under Demographics. And here we see Education Highest Level Completed. Now for my inquiry, I don't want to just select college graduates, as that may exclude folks with advanced degrees. So let's continue to scroll down and select people who have a bachelor's degree or higher. And we'll drag that down to our box next to the very interested variable. As we do, watch what happens to the colors. As we drag this variable into our box, the outline of the box changes from green to red, and the variable for the NFL very interested also changes to red, indicating that something in here is not happy. Since we're looking for people who are both NFL fans and have a bachelor's degree or higher, we have to add an "and" to combine the two variables. We can put our cursor where the "and" should go, and then click on the "and" button. This changes everything back to green, and now we're all happy and good to go. I'm also going to click on the box here to change the name to something more meaningful, like highly educated NFL fans. Now once I'm ready to add this customized variable to the columns, I have to scroll down and then click on the columns button to move it to the columns. Here we see a difference among all NFL fans and the smaller group of NFL fans with college or advanced degrees. Looking at the index, here we see that NFL fans with at least a college degree, or perhaps an advanced degree, are 14% less likely than the average consumer to buy a Ford, while also 29% more likely to buy a Toyota. If we scroll over now and compare this to our NBA fans, we can see that the purchasing behaviors of our highly educated NFL fans are very similar to the average NBA fans. If we want to save this information, our best bet is use the export button on the left-hand side and save the table as an Excel file. I strongly encourage you to export your work as an Excel file because it does take a while to generate a good report from Simmons, and you'll want to make sure that you save that for your later use. In this video, you've learned how to use Simmons to create crosstabs for sports fans, and what you've learned here will apply to whatever consumer product or consumer group that you're looking at. You've also become more experienced and familiar with how to use some of the more advanced features of Simmons. If you'd like to learn more about using Simmons, I encourage you to visit my Simmons Tips and Tricks guide. There I'll have video examples as well as text and images and step-by-step instructions to help you with this database. I wish you the best of luck with your research.